Alright, third grade, once your Zentangle is completely done and filled in with an assortment of random patterns, just like this one, or obviously your own design, you can set that guy aside for now, and we're going to be using some watercolor paper to make a watercolor painting. Now that's where our cheat sheet is going to come in handy, because what we're going to have to do is decide whether or not we're going to use the warm or the cool colors to paint our paper. And I've got two examples done already. If you choose a cool example, it's going to look a little bit like this. If you're doing cool colors, you're going to start with green, blue will be in the middle, and then purple will be on the bottom. Obviously, it changes depending on the orientation of your paper. And if you choose warm colors, you're going to have one that looks like this with orange in the middle, and then red and yellow on the top or bottom, depending on which way you look at it. When we get ready to start painting, though, we have a special technique that we're going to use. And the technique we're going to use with our watercolor paint is called a wet into wet technique. It's called that because what we end up doing is putting down water first, and that water is going to go edge to edge, top to bottom on the paper, but we're going to do enough water for one color at a time. So since I'm going to be using 3 colors, I'm going to split my paper into thirds. Roughly, it doesn't have to be precise, and I'm going to put water on about a third of my paper. Since I'm going to do this one with cool colors, I'm going to start with my green. And that wet into wet, again, just means we've got a wet surface, and then we're painting wet paint into it. With watercolor paint, the more water we add in the tray right here, the lighter the color is going to be. The less water we add, the darker that color is going to be. Now the cool thing about a wet into wet technique is that it's a little bit quicker because that water pulls the paint around naturally. But it's also going to give us a nice smooth transition in between colors. And I'll show you what I mean as I paint this next section with my blue. Again, I'm going to use my wet into wet, and all I'm doing right now is just brushing some water onto my watercolor paper, filling up the second of my thirds, and then I'm going to put some blue down on top of it. Obviously, with the wet into wet technique, you can see that some of my green paint is being pulled down already by the water. That's okay. And I'm going to add some blue. Now if you start to watch this section up at the top right here, as my blue goes down, you'll see what that wet into wet does when the colors begin to mix. Now mixing too many colors, especially with secondary colors, mixing too many colors can create a brown, which we already know is kind of a neutral color. So if you just brush a few strokes back and forth here, you'll end up with a nice smooth transition. The bottom piece is going to be done with purple. Now another cool thing that kids like to see with the wet into wet technique is how that paint will actually move around if you pick your paper up. Now since we should all be wearing aprons, if we are going to pick our paper up and kind of watch our colors move around, that's okay. Just make sure it stays away from any clothing that's not covered up by your apron. And if any water drips onto the table, make sure that gets cleaned up at the end of class. But you can see what's happening with that purple as it starts to move down into the blue. Creates a cool effect. Anyway, that guy is ready to go into the drawing rack. Now we're almost done with this piece completely. We've been using an ultra-fine Sharpie marker to fill in all our patterns, but now we have to switch to just a regular fine point marker that's got that little bit fatter tip. And all we're going to do with this is go around the edge of our project with Sharpie to add a little bit thicker line, so that way when we cut it out, we've got something nice and thick and black separating our Zentangle from our color. On this project we talked about black, white, and brown being a neutral, but in actuality white is all of the colors combined and reflects light, but black is actually an absence of color that absorbs light. Brown is made up of combining red, yellow, and black, or if you combine all the paint on your tray, you get a brown. Once you got your black outline, you're going to take some scissors and you're going to begin to carefully cut out your Zentangle. And once your painting is dry, here's what's going to happen. Choose which color you want at the top, and you're going to end up gluing your Zentangle on the corner of that project, somewhere about here. Obviously, if I wanted to do it the other way, I'd end up with the purple at the top, but I think I like the green the best. So we're going to have to flip our project over. And this is one of the few times in the art room where dot, dot, not a lot might not work all that well. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a thin line of glue on each one of these little petals. And I know it's kind of hard to see because of the permanent marker, but when we put down our glue, we don't want it right on the edge of the paper because it's going to smush out when we glue it down. One of the biggest problems kids have at this point is lining up the corners. The easiest way to do that is to come in with your Zentangle and lay it down from the top, and then before you press all the glue, even up the edges here and here, make sure the corners are plugged in and touching. From there, all you have to do is start to smooth it out carefully, gently, so we have something that looks just like this. Now this is a finished project, and this would be an example of something that's probably a 3. But if you wanted to kind of work a little bit closer towards getting the 4, you can use that thicker Sharpie with the fine point written on it, and you can come in and maybe add a thicker border around your Zentangle, and then put one more pattern inside that border.